Okay. So, hi everyone. I'm here with Daniel G. Wilson. Daniel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Certainly. Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel G. Wilson. I am a Jamaican Canadian comic book writer, musician, and a bunch of other things. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Ashley, for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. So, you're a man of many talents then?
I'd like to call myself a jack of many trades and a master of none.
Yeah. So, the comic book you're working on is called Ivanhoe. I was wondering if you wanted to tell us about that.
Certainly. Well, Ivanhoe is it's a comic. It's a comic I'm doing with an artist in Mexico named Sam Parada. Essentially it's a Jamaican crime story. So in Jamaica we have a history. There's a history of a lot of crime films and action films. It's also pretty much every Jamaican loves a good Western, Hong Kong action film, crime drama, etc. So I wanted to kind of make an homage to the history of Jamaican crime films, adding a few of my own personal tastes into it as well.
Yeah, I read some of the preview pages, and yeah, it's pretty good. It kind of put me in mind of things like Extraction.
Nice.
So, I was wondering what got you into comics?
Well, it's a bit odd. So I've always loved. So I got into comics because of animation. Oddly enough, when I was pretty much from I was in my mother's womb, like I was. My mom used to watch comics, not read comics. Sorry, she used to watch a lot of cartoons in the 90s when she was pregnant with me, and then she continued doing that after I was born, and so I just grew up watching a lot of cartoons. So and because like I was born in 96, right? So I kind of gained consciousness around the time of the tail end of and during the kind of new golden age or renaissance of Western / American cartoons. So and also, I'm Jamaican Canadian, right? So the fact that I was also in Canada at that time means that I had access to a lot of foreign cartoons from like Europe and stuff in co-productions, because at the time Canada was heavily involved. The Canadian industry was heavily involved with a lot of foreign co-productions, like the channel Teletoon. So, and this was also the time when anime was becoming was creating its first boom in the Anglosphere. So altogether, that kind of congealed to me sitting down watching all these cartoons, like a lot of cartoons. And so I always loved the stuff that was based off of comic books, but I didn't really have a lot of comic books at the time, except Archie comics, obviously, and my cousin's Mad magazines. It wasn't until I think the first comic book that I ever got that wasn't an Archie comic that was handed down to me was I forget the issue, but it was an X-Men comic that I got that was in French that was partially in French on a trip to Montreal when I was like 9. First comic I ever got. It was at this variety store, but I didn't start getting comics until years later. The next comic that I got for myself was when I was 11, 12. I was living in Jamaica at the time, and there's no comic book scene or kind of stuff there. So I was living in the country as well. So whatever comics there were in bookstores, I couldn't have access to. So I got a Superman comic. Superman comics would occasionally appear at this drugstore at the next town over. And so I would go to this drugstore, and then when I would see a comic there, I'd pick it up for like $2 free, right? I'd pick it up. And the next comic that I got was a collection of the first appearance of Black Panther in a digest size collection. You never read those classic comics in digest side, especially with all the words. It's crammed as heck. I got that from a bookstore in Kingston when we had gone there to get some books and stuff. some educational books and stuff like that. So I got that. So it wasn't until I was like a teenager and living here again in Canada again that I went to a comic book store for the first time. I had already been abreast of comics, so like I knew, you know, the history of them. I would read Wikipedia articles when I was younger, particularly in Jamaica. Thankfully, I had internet, but I didn't get a chance to fully immerse myself in the comics themselves. And once I was back here and I was old enough to kind of go on my own and do stuff, it was a wrap. I would sit in the library and read comics for hours and hours and hours. And I would I'd go to the comic book store, I'd go to conventions. Because at the time in Jamaica, for example, they didn't have a lot of comic conventions. So I had been old enough to go, but they weren't really around as much. And like the one or two that were, I didn't know of, or they were in Kingston, which again, you can't, that's not really that's like an hour and a half drive from where I lived. But yeah, as a kid, I always wanted to make comics. I always wanted to write them, you know. I always I had like an entire list of superhero worlds, you know. I love Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, all that type of stuff. And as I got older, I got more into like alternative comics and manga. I got into them all at the same time. European comics are a bit later because there were as many translations up to even 10 years ago. There were as many easily accessible translations. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Sorry if I...
Yeah, definitely. I actually I feel a lot of the same way. I was born in '97 and grew up with things like Justice League and X-Men and Spider-Man, and that's really where my love of the comic book, you know, properties comes from. And then you know, kind of discover comics as I got older. So yeah, I think a lot of people are going to hear that and identify a lot with you.
Yeah, it was that period, that kind of that late 90s, early 2000s period was really good for comics. It was good for a lot for comics animation. It was a really boom time, especially for very nuanced stuff as well. You know, for a lot of kids who kind of weren't around in that period, you know, it was very, you know, it was, who's listening, for example, it was a very pivotal moment for a lot of people. You know, it's you know, and the one person I know who kind of came around, who was around at that time, who's making comics now, is Juni Ba from Senegal.
Mm-hmm.
If you check out his work, one of his most recent work is like Monkey Meat, and then Deliva, I think, is the name of his other comic. He's a great artist and writer. And a lot of his influences are cartoons, 2000s, like Cartoon Network cartoons, right?
Yeah.
Like you look at his style, you can see the Jenny Tartakovsky influence, and but also with manga, because manga was starting to get, you know, Senegal francophone, right? So the one library that they had where he was living, they had some manga translations, some manga French translations, and some European comics, and a few American comics. So, but yeah, a lot of his influence was those cartoons, you know. And it's interesting seeing his work now and seeing, oh yeah, I know what his influences are just by looking at his work.
Yeah, I think the great thing about that era of cartoons is it wasn't infantilizing. It was very, you know, for things that were aimed at kids, it was pretty mature, and I think made it a lot more accessible to everyone.
Oh, definitely.
So I was wondering, who would you so you mentioned American comics, but also Japanese stuff. I was wondering what kind of creators would you say you look up to, and you know.
It changes a lot, but some of the core ones, particularly because like I'm a writer, right? I'm a writer primarily, right? I'm teaching myself to draw, but you know, I for me, some of the most influential ones. So Neil Gaiman, right off the bat, was very pivotal in kind of me, in kind of my how I view comics and just storytelling in general. You know, reading Sandman was so profound, because it was like this guy who was very literate, right? Very literate well read, and but liked a lot of the stuff. I liked obviously fantasy, sci-fi, genres of horror, etc. But he viewed comics as simply a medium, and even viewed genres themselves as a bottle or medium you can fill anything with, right? So that was pivotal for me. Getting in touch with Salmon early, and as well as his work in general, was it kind of helped to show me that anything is possible right off the bat, is particularly even from a writer perspective, that how you can work with artists, with a range of artists and stuff like that, and get great ideas onto the page. Alan Moore, goes without saying. Alan Moore, his writing, the way he's able to approach themes, narrative, you know masterful. Grant Morrison, the standard kind of stuff. I was also then, for say Japanese creators, outside of like the usual stuff, like when you're a kid, I often like to joke that like for a lot of people, like Naruto was like this pivotal moment for them. Naruto wasn't that for me. I like Naruto, but like I was already aware of like anime before Naruto, for example, or Bleach, or Bleach or One Piece. So when all these things were appearing on the American side, I already knew what anime was. So it was just another anime for me, and I already knew a lot of the tropes by that point, as young as I was, because I had already watched Dragon Ball Z. I would probably say Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball, like Akira Toriyama, just the way just kind of the whimsical nature of his creativity, especially in the pre-Z era. The adventure stories, the way he's able to incorporate mythology into what he's trying to do, and just the kind of, there's a certain freedom in what he's doing. Katsuhiro Otomo, Akira, I saw that when I was like 11. That was very impactful for me. Just again, the exploration of themes, the darkness, just the whole way it depicted the world. Hellboy was another major influence. Again, I like blending a lot of elements together, weird fiction. And I would say Enki Bilal for European creators. When I was in Canada, I was in the hospital, and I was came out to Canada, and I was reading a book from the library called by Paul Graveau or Gravat. It was about comics, and it had this big collection of different, comics from around the world in different genres. And there was a entry on there about sci-fi, and it had an image of the Nikopol trilogy by Enki Bilal. That image had been burned in my mind for years, and but I couldn't find a cheap translation, and I recently picked one up, thankfully, the modern day, thankful for Titan Comics. So those are kind of like some of my bigger influences, and it shifts a lot. Right now I'm very influenced by Argentinian comics and their creators, like writers like Carlos Trillo, Ricardo Barreiro, Hector Herman Osterheld. And with art, even though I can't draw, I'm always looking at like how artists approach storytelling, right? So, Atomo, Moebius, Sam Keith, obviously Mike Mignola, and currently a lot of other European creators, particularly and Argentine creators, Alberto and Enrique Breccia, Eduardo Riso, and Enrique Alcatina, and there's an Italian artist, Sergio Topi. So it's shifting, but those are kind of the list of like some of my more primary influences at the most. Oh, and for Japan, Taiyo Matsumoto, I've been getting into his work a lot recently.
Yeah, so that's interesting, because I've had a few people on, and pretty much everyone mentions Naruto, but also you mentioned liking comics from Argentina. I think there's a really kind of underrated and thriving comic book scene in Central and South America. The artist I'm working with on my comics is actually from Brazil, and you talk, most of the people you talk to are from Mexico and Brazil and Argentina and those kinds of places. So yeah, I mean, there's a really good scene down there.
Oh yeah. Some of the best some of the best cartoonists and some of the best artists in the world have come from Latin America. It's it's ridiculous how much talent is in that region.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it's true of comics at the moment. You've got guys like Jorge Jimenez on Batman, and I'd say is probably the best artist in the business at the moment. Are you big on kind of current American comics, or are you more into Japanese stuff at the moment?
I'm more into like classic at the moment. Let me see. I like American comics, but like a lot of the American comics I've been really reading are like more of the alternative independent stuff, or like Image kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't really follow. I keep abreast of what's going on, but I don't really like follow superhero comics, the big two superhero comics mainly, or the big two that much. Um, I don't really follow them as much and as much. I do with Japanese comics. That's with like manga and stuff. I kind of I'm reading less of it nowadays. Just because I'm reading less of it nowadays. Like a lot of it is mainly like if I find a particular run of like a particular series or creator that I'm interested in, like some seinen series or some kind of offbeat stuff. The most recent kind of creator I fell in love with from Japan, also have, kind of discovering Tao Matsumoto stuff, was Kyu Hayashida. She is the creator of Dorohedoro and Die Dark. I like her work because she has a very offbeat sensibility. Her while she still suffers from same face syndrome a lot of the time, her art style is, again, it's very idiosyncratic. Her writing is just, she is able to make these compelling characters who like they're all sociopaths, but you just root for them and love them.
Yeah.
As well as an artistic sensibility that is very punk rock, very like she's the only person I had seen who was able to perfectly capture like a cyberpunk like aesthetic without the cyberpunk, without like the cyber aspect. It's kind of like it's very much like, and I don't know where she gets her influences from. Like, I'm familiar with like Battle Angel Alita or Gun, Ghost in the Shell, Akira, like, classic Japanese cyberpunk manga, and as well as Western cyberpunk. It feel like Dorohedoro feels like cyberpunk, right? Even down to the social kind of commentary bits, but there's no technology in it. So it's dark fantasy. So it's I like her writing, and I really like her writing and stuff. Chainsaw Man, obviously, Chainsaw Man kind of got me back into writing comics because, just seeing what Tatsuki Fujimoto was able to do. I don't think he's necessarily the most like innovative. A lot of the stuff he's doing has been done before. When a lot of people tend to act like, he's like, it's shocking when it's like, shonen manga in the 90s and 80s was far more violent than it is now. Like Devilman was originally a shonen manga. Violence Jack, if you've heard of that, was a shonen manga. Like a lot of Go Nagai's violent works for shonen. Apocalypse Zero was this really messed up manga in the 90s. In fact, shonen manga has gotten a lot safer in recent years, or even down to there being less nudity. But I found the fact that his execution of a lot of the ideas he's doing there's a sense of freedom to his writing and what he's doing. There's a sense of freedom. Like, this is a guy unleashed and just letting his id kind of onto the page. And there's it's inspirational, to just see this guy freely create the way he does, but it's a lot of what I'm into currently is like a lot of like European comics. I've been digging into that because there's a lot of translations now. So Franco-Belgian comics, Italian comics, British comics. Been digging into Pat Mills' oeuvre. I've been digging into the work of Jean Van Ham, and getting into like the kind of avant-garde Italian cartoonists and writers, like Rank Xerox, Andrea Pazienza, and Hugo Pratt and stuff.
Yeah, when it comes to European comics, because I'm originally English, and I always feel like I should know more about English comics, but most of it for me just comes back to like Judge Dredd. I don't know if you're a fan of that, but
yeah.
And so people kind of expect me to know, like, oh, you're from England, you must know a lot about English comics, and I'm just like, if it's not Judge Dredd, then not so much.
That's fair.
Yeah. So I wanted to bring it back to Ivanhoe for a minute. So you've got 3 chapters, I think, at the moment, right?
3 chapters, yeah. 3 chapters, yeah. The entire comic is 20 pages, roughly, but I divide it into 3 chapters.
So you're planning on expanding with more issues?
Yes. I'm currently working. The cover's currently being drawn. Sam's working on the cover, and once the cover is like done and everything, then I'm planning on sort of recompiling the comic, and then kind of promoting it more, and then pitching the series to indie publishers, see if anyone would be interested in kind of putting it out or something like that, or see what the response is. But I do intend to make more to produce more issues.
So you have it up on Global Comics at the moment. Is it just digital, or do you have anything in print at the moment?
It's just digital at the moment.
Yeah, it's probably a bit safer that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's with the benefits of digital is same thing with like music, right? Because I'm also a musician. I prefer physical, even with comics. I prefer reading comics or anything did in physically, right? But
yeah, I'm the same way.
Yeah, right. It just feels better and also less eye strain. But with digital, you basically have access to the entire world, right? Anyone from anywhere can read what you put out or check it out if they speak English, and if not, they can still use, even if you want to use Google Translate, right? And you have all this access and ability to kind of gather attention and eyes, so it's easier and, in my opinion, more cost effective to kind of put it up, for people to read, see, garner support and attention. And then once you at least know that there's an audience or something, you can then get it printed, and there's avenues for that, crowdfunding, publisher, etc. But with online first, it's a lot easier, and it's a lot and less of a risky investment.
Yeah, definitely know what you mean. So I was wondering, because this is something I've asked other people, is it just the for Ivanhoe, is it just going to be a single kind of linear story, or are you going to have spin-offs and a shared universe, or just keep it simple?
Well, it honestly depends on how. Full disclosure, like a lot of that depends on how popular it is. Like, if once I start pushing this heavily, if the response is like astronomical, then I'd probably come up with spin-offs and an entire universe of characters. But if it's regular, just kind of okay or something, even with that, I do plan on the story itself isn't linear exactly. Even if you reading it, for example, it's not like it's meant to be a general kind of crime story. So it's kind of like, if Stray Bullets by David Lapham.
I don't.
Ed Brubaker's work with Sean Phillips, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So basically, it's like that. So my goal is to have more episodes, more issues where I'm using the main character or the characters in the story, and each issue deals with is a different self-contained plot line. This current one is about essentially goat thievery. It's a commentary on goat thievery in Jamaica, pretty larceny, where a lot of where people steal goats, right? Because it's a lot of Jamaica's rule, and people farm and do stuff. But then in the modern day they're selling the goats, stealing goats, and then selling the goats to Haiti for guns, because Haiti's like, Haiti's in a sort of dire straits at the moment. So that's a thing where the Haitians are coming to Jamaica, or the Jamaicans are going to Haiti and selling the goats that they stole and take for guns. And so that's what this is about. Each episode, each issue for me, my goal is to use each issue to kind of examine different stuff in Jamaica and the broader Caribbean and kind of Latin American context, and examine that through the lens of a crime story and kind of comment on that. So even there, the main character Ivan, he is a former soldier. So there'd be episodes where I would be discussing Jamaican soldiers and Caribbean soldiers who kind of who were kind of, basically had to fight for England and England's wars and their nonsense, and but then ended up not getting a lot in return. So each episode it would be a self-contained story, but still following the main character.
So kind of like I don't know if you've been reading it, but kind of like that Texas Blood.
I have not read that one yet. I'll check it out now.
It's pretty good. It's from Image. It's kind of like a True Detective kind of vibes.
Yeah, it would be like that.
Yeah, that definitely sounds interesting. I think there's definitely a big market for that kind of non-super, just kind of grounded crime thriller kind of stories.
Yeah, I definitely. And I would, because with Jamaican stories and stuff like that, there would be a few moments of a bit of dark humor here and there. A bit of dark humor here or there. A bit of dark humor here or there. So, I hope people like that. There aren't a lot of Jamaican stories in comics. Jamaica is only kind of now getting a lot of comic books made by Jamaicans, like particular ones living in Jamaica, and in the diaspora. We've always been making comics. Ho Che Anderson is another famous cartoonist. He is Jamaican Canadian, and he's been making comics since the 80s. But we don't normally feature our own stories in what we're doing. So one of my goals is to do, show an aspect of, and in general, my general kind of goals with writing a lot of comics is, exploring aspects of Jamaican culture and kind of bringing that to the fore in comics, not necessarily superheroes, although if Marvel or DC are listening to this, my door is always open. My email's always open. But not necessarily superheroes, but just various characters, and trying to explore elements of like the country, the history, in an interesting way, and particularly even incorporating Patwa and stuff like that, like our language into comics, So that's I'm hoping I get to do that.
Yeah, I think one of the great things about the internet and putting your comics up on the internet is that anyone from anywhere can do their stories, and you don't have to be, not everything has to center around New York.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. So could you tell us a bit about your creative team? You were talking about the artist there, and I was just wondering, how did you meet and how did this all come together?
Reddit, surprisingly enough. So this was this was like in November, I think. I was on Reddit. I was looking for artists and stuff like that to collaborate with. I was working. I had gotten in touch with contact before that. I had gotten in contact with one artist. Uh, didn't end well. Didn't end well. I ended up being out X amount of. I'm not going to say how much, but I got out for a 2-page story. Got out a bit there. Kind of left me in the lurch. There it happens.
Definitely does, yeah.
It happens. And so, but you pick yourself up, and I still had the script, right? And I was looking for stuff, and then I found Sam had posted, in Comics Collabs that he was he was available to make some comics for short projects. So I hit him up. I was like, because I immediately liked his art style. I thought it was dynamic. I thought it was dynamic and idiosyncratic. I thought it was cool. And so I hit him up, and he was down. This was for an unrelated project. It was for a semi-auto-bio story about my experience in lockdown and stuff. And it went well. He's great to work. He's great to work with. Very professional. And from there, I decided, I had another script, which is Ivanhoe, and I hit him up, and he was down. And so we slowly worked on the pages. When I hit him up, it was only like a short. I only had the first chapter, which was 6 pages. I write. I like to say I write in an English fashion, i.e., 5 to 6, 7 pages each, like scenes. So I only had the first chapter written. So when I hit him up, I asked him if he was into the story, and so he said yeah, and so we've been working on it ever since. And then once he would finish the last page of each chapter, I would then take a couple of days and write the next 6 pages, and then and then that's what we did. So he's very easy to work with. He's worked on a lot of projects, including his own project, which was Sons Walker, which is a very offbeat story. He had another story on, I think, Manga Plus, Teenage Wasteland, I think was its name. I have to double check. And he's been working for the past several years on a lot of other like projects and stuff like that, So he's a fantastic artist.
Yeah, his art is fantastic. It's kind of halfway between sort of American cartoonist art and manga art.
Oh yeah.
It was definitely caught my eye because there's I'm not personally into Japanese comics as much as everyone else is, but it's the kind of thing where you do the art is the first thing that catches your eye, and it's absolutely fantastic.
Oh yeah. That's one aspect of his work, which for me I really like as well, is that like you can tell where a lot of the influences are, but it's very his own. It's very unique, because with a lot of people, when they are influenced, say, heavily by manga, for example, or anime, they tend to try to approximate like manga. I mean, you know what I mean?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, and instead of kind of taking that influence and incorporating into their work, they're trying to kind of copy, what kind of the standard template of what Japanese art, or what the standard manga look, which is kind of more of an average type thing. It's whereas some of the best mangaka usually tend to have a far more idiosyncratic style. And a lot of the reason why manga looks the way it does is because of the constraints of the industry they have over there. So when I see an artist that clearly has a manga influence, but has other influences they're throwing in there, and other things, like in Sam's case, a lot of influences from Western comics, as Western comics and cartoons and stuff as well. It really stands out. The another artist that I can think of that does this, that I've recently whose art I fell in love with, is this French artist Merwan. I think he's French. Artist Merwan, who produced like a work called The Aster of Pan and False Guard. His work is very clearly manga influenced, but it's done in a way where it's still clearly like, a Franco-Belgian style, but you can tell that this guy grew up kind of in the post-manga era, post-anime manga era, where, he clearly likes Dragon Ball Z, Otomo, and a lot of that stuff, but it's still very much himself.
Yeah, on the art front, you see the same thing in American comics, where you see people who clearly, used Jim Lee or Rob Liefeld to learn how to draw, and they kind of go all into that rather than trying to find their own style.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So you're talking about, you're also a musician. Do you want to talk about your music career?
Well, I'm a guitar player. I'm the guitar player. I'm a guitar player singer. I like to say I'm a horrible multi-instrumentalist.
Yeah.
I play guitar. I mainly play rhythm guitar. And I can play percussion. I program drums. I can play bass, and I can play reggae on the piano, on the keyboard and piano. And I can play melodica because of the limited piano skills I have. But yeah, I'm the main. I have a band called Joncro, Joncro. It's Potwa for Vulture. I'm the front person and primary like songwriter. So before COVID had happened, we were doing lots of stuff. We put out like an album and several EPs and singles. So if you look us up online, you can listen to a lot of the music we put out. I was even I've even moonlit as a concert promoter, and kind of one of my main kind of stuff is I'm also like a music journalist. I've written stuff for Vice, and stuff. I wrote stuff for Vice. Premieres mainly went out several years ago, when Noisy Canada was a thing, and I write for a Canadian music journalistic co-op called New Feeling. So you can see my writing if you Google my name and stuff. So yeah. At the moment, for various reasons, I've had to kind of put my musical stuff on hiatus, playing live and stuff like that, and recording. So, in that time, because again, right, I always loved, I always loved comics. So I kind of end up falling back into, essentially what was my first love, because I was obsessed with comics before I became a musician.
Yeah, so you're definitely putting your writing skills to good use then.
Oh yeah.
So I was wondering, because you said earlier, obviously, who wouldn't want Marvel or DC to come, knocking on the door? Are there any characters in particular you like to write from the big two?
I mean, okay, everyone wants to do everyone wants to do a Batman story, right? That goes without saying,
Yeah.
I would love to do a Batman story. Honestly, if DC ever hit me up and like gave me kind of carte blanche to do kind of like a self-contained Batman story, I would love to do a Batman story kind of framed from a Jamaican or Caribbean perspective. I would love to do that. I would love to do that. Just have like a Jamaican Batman. That'd be very cool. I think I would love to do the question. The question was one of the first characters, like outside of the obvious tentpoles that I really fell in love with when I was younger. Watching Justice League, the cartoon Justice League Unlimited, I was obsessed with like the detective guy. I always loved the detective characters, so I would love to do a question story. Who else? For I would love to do like a lot of the more cosmic kind of characters. Constantine, obviously. You can tell I like the kind of the kind of detective-y ones. I would
Yeah.
love to do a Plastic Man story just because I feel like Plastic Man will be really good to do a story where you could kind of get really wild with it
Yeah.
thematically. And I would, who else would I want to do? I would probably want to do a Flash storyline, but like that would be hard to do honestly because like I loved super speed when I was younger, so I think because of my love of that type of character, I would probably be horrible at it. Um, kind of like the joke of like Garth, like kind of like Garth Ennis when he would always say like he part of the reason why he probably is good at writing certain superhero characters because he doesn't like superheroes. So he comes out with a fresh perspective. So if I had to write like a speedster character, it would probably not be good because I just like the character too much. Um, for
Well,
Marv, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say it is kind of funny how that works because a lot of the best known superhero writers hate superheroes.
Right?
Yeah.
You know,
Alan Moore tried to just destroy superheroes and wound up being one of the most popular superhero writers of all time.
I know. The one person I could think of who like really likes superheroes but then comes at it from a different perspective is Grant Morrison.
Yeah.
And in Grant Morrison's case, Grant Morrison is very idiosyncratic. So I think anything that they like Grant Morrison would probably make it into some kind of masterpiece just because of how their brain works. For Marvel comics, Marvel now, I would love to do cosmic Marvel stories. I always fell in love with like the cosmic characters. Like I was obsessed with the Silver Surfer as a kid. So anything cosmic. So I would love to do a Silver Surfer story. I would love to do a Doctor Strange story, a story featuring like Galactus, pretty much any non Earthbound character. In terms of Earthbound characters, I would like to try my hand at doing a Daredevil story. Um, uh, I don't think I'd be as good as like as Frank Miller, obviously, or even Kevin Smith's runner and Nocenti or Chip Zdarsky, but I think I might have some ideas for what to do with his character with Matt Murdock. I would like to do a character. What are the characters would I like to do for Marvel? I like to do a Fantastic Four story if they'd let me. Um, there like there's a lot of different characters there. Um, I'd love to do a Spider-Man story. That would be interesting. But I would probably want to do a Miles Morales story because at least in his case, I have an excuse to kind of again going back to say kind of Caribbean stuff because Miles Morales is half Puerto Rican if I'm reading correctly, so I have an excuse to kind of put him in a different environment, right?
Yeah.
So uh, I like the idea that I would have an excuse to kind of have him say maybe he goes and visits family in the Caribbean, and so I have an excuse to kind of have him brought into that milieu so that I can then kind of incorporate some stuff there. I would love to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think that both the big two could definitely benefit from changes of scenery.
Yeah, New York is fun and all, but
Yeah, there's only so many new city streets that you can read before you just want something else.
Yeah. Oh, one other character I would like to do is Jonah Hex. I would love
Nice.
to do. I'd love to do a Jonah Hex story. just there's so much about his character, Jonah Hex, so much about Jonah Hex's character that I like. The idea that he is this that he's this former Confederate soldier who basically thought that they're all a bunch of idiots, who kind of knows the problems with what that side was fighting for, and how, you know, there's so many stories you could do with this character who's kind of is aware of like the faults in himself and the faults in where he's from, and kind of, you know, is aware of like so much. Like there's so many things you could do with that story that I think would be interesting to tackle from various angles. I would love to do a Jonah Hex story if anyone ever let me.
Yeah, when I was hearing you describe the first Ivanhoe story, that definitely put me in mind of Westerns. So yeah, I think that'd be a good fit.
Yeah.
So I'm going to let you go here, but where can people follow you?
Well, they can follow me on on social media. On Twitter, it's John Crow Band at Twitter, at John Crow Band. I know my band Twitter is my personal Twitter account. It just makes it easier for me to use Twitter that way than having to manage two accounts. But it's me. I manage the person. It's basically my personal account, but I also use it for the band as well. For me personally, you can follow me at Daniel_1876. That's on Instagram, and on Global Comics, which is where I'm hosting my comics at the moment. You can, if you go to Ivanhoe, you know, you'll be able to find the profile it's linked to. My creator page is DGW on there, and my you know, profile on there is Daniel-G. And if you just look up Daniel G. Wilson on Global Comics, you'll be able to follow me and whatever I'm putting out.
All right, fantastic. And I will link those in the description of this video. So if you're listening, just head on over to Global Comics and look up Ivanhoe.
Awesome.
So thanks for coming on, Daniel. It's been a really good chat.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.